and get started. Okay, so we're here today to talk to you about the final countdown, Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 end of life. This is kind of the general agenda. We're going to go through the Drupal release schedule. We're going to talk about why Drupal 9. If you haven't heard of Drupal 9 for some reason, it's good to be aware of kind of the stuff coming down the pipe that's currently in development. Then we're going to go through some practical steps on going from Drupal 8 to 9, and as well as Drupal 7 to 9. And then finally, Matt's going to lead us out with a case study on how we moved Acquia.com to Drupal 9. So, and I don't know if we'll have time for Q&A, but we do have some booth sessions later on where we can take Q&A if that extends beyond this session. So let's jump into it. So Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 end of life is coming. So you can see here with the little pretty lines, Drupal 7 support is extended until November of 2022. That was originally November of 2021 this year, but because of COVID and because 7 to 8 and 9 is like a big jump, and we'll talk about that in a moment, we decided to extend that support for 1 extra year. And then beyond that, there's also commercial Drupal 7 extended support provided by a few different vendors if you want to use Drupal 7 beyond November of 2022. Drupal 8, however, does end support of this year, and there is no commercial extended support for that. The reason for that is because Drupal 8 requires Symfony 3, which is an older version of Symfony, and the upstream Symfony project is ending support for that version of Symfony, which means we too need to end that support as well, or else our users end up not having important security fixes and things like that. So if you're on Drupal 8, between now and November, you need to make the jump to Drupal 9, and then from Drupal 9 to Drupal 10 to Drupal 11, and so on. If you have been in the Drupal community for a while, that prospect is probably absolutely terrifying because you're used to jumping from, say, 4.7 to 5, and 5 to 6, and 6 to 7. Those were really big jumps that required, you know, a whole bunch of retooling of modules and things like that. Drupal 8 to 9 is a much shorter jump, and we'll talk about why that is. So if you haven't seen Drupal 9, if you've been on Drupal 7 happily for the past 10 years and you haven't really been looking around, these are just a few of the Drupal 9 innovations that you'll get if you move to Drupal 9. A lot of these were in Drupal 8 as well. But with the kind of the biggest thing I want to call out here is that would be different if you haven't touched Drupal in a while is these 6-month feature releases. So every 6 months, we bump the version number of Drupal, so 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, things like that. And what we give you in those releases is backwards compatible features. So new APIs that you can implement, new themes, new features within the core product, and all of the things that you see here, media, layout, workflow, and so on. These were all done in these 6-month feature releases of Drupal 8. So Drupal 8.0 didn't have media. You know, we didn't have that till, say, Drupal 8.4. And then all you would get out of that is you get new features that you can use in your site, and you kind of go from there. The other thing I want to call attention to is the easy upgrade path from Drupal 8 to Drupal 9. And that is great. We purposely made it so that, for example, Drupal 8 modules can run in both versions, Drupal 8 and 9 at the same time. So we don't get into this problem that we've had in the past of, you know, developers kind of saying like, well, I have to rewrite my whole module anyway. I might as well rewrite my whole module, and then, you know, having months or years between the major versions of these modules coming out. So let's talk about Drupal 8 to 9 and what that path looks like, and I'll hand it over to Matt for this.
Awesome. Thanks, Angie. Okay. Little echo. Is that mine?
Oh, that might be me.
Maybe. Yeah, Angie, do you want to try muting? Or I can mute you.
Yeah, I think I'm muted now.
I think that's probably better. Awesome. All right, cool. So upgrading to Drupal 9, we've defined basically these just kind of 5 quick steps, right? So the first thing to do is make sure your environment is compatible with all the requirements for Drupal 9. So some of the stuff Angie talked about, just making sure everything is kind of good from a hosting perspective. So PHP versions, MySQL versions, all that kind of stuff. Next is to make sure you update core to the latest Drupal 8 version. All right, so upgrade to Drupal 8.8 and 8.9 to make sure that things work correctly so that when you perform the core update, things are kind of good to go. And then update all your contributor projects so so that they are Drupal 9 compatible. So a lot of projects support 8 and 9. So you can make sure you get to the latest version to make sure that they're good to go. And then remove any deprecated API use and custom code. As with any Drupal site, obviously there's going to be some level of custom code. So you can make those updates and make sure you remove those kind of ahead of time. And Drupal 8.8 and 8.9 will kind of support you in showing those issues. And then just update Drupal core to Drupal 9. And then you should be mostly done. So there are three key tools to help you to get to D9. The first is the upgrade status module, which has a personalized D9 readiness dashboard that will show you basically everything as it currently exists with your site and kind of what you need to do to make it compatible with Drupal 9 and what changes need to be made. There's also the upgrade director, which provides automated code fixing. And then we also have deprecation status, which is our dashboard of community readiness for moving to Drupal 9. And then just kind of showing some of these a little bit more. Upgrade status, when you install this, it'll kind of show you what the requirements are for upgrading your site. So see in the screenshot, it says like core should be at 8.8 or 8.9 to make that easier. Also checks like PHP versions, MySQL versions. It also then starts to break down into module versions that are supported. And Drupal Director will provide automated PHP code fixes. So if you have any custom code, it'll help update that to deprecate API use and make sure things are good to go. And then the deprecation status dashboard, this is available on dev.acquia. Right now, the current version we have out there is for Drupal 9. The team is working on the Drupal 10 one coming soon. But this will show you kind of module compatibility and where things are at, if there's outstanding patches, things that need to be fixed, kind of what the upgrade plan is. So you can make sure everything's kind of good to go.
Okay, then I can jump in here and talk a little bit about this Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 migration path. So 8 to 9 is pretty straightforward. You know, get on the latest version of all the stuff, get rid of the deprecated APIs, run update PHP, you're done. Drupal 7 and 9, on the other hand, is more of a process. So we call this is a migration, not an upgrade. So you are kind of taking from an older system and you're moving it into a newer system. And there's a lot of different, you know, sort of implements of that. For example, analysis and planning, especially if you built your site 10 years ago when Drupal 7 first came out, you're going to want to take a look at that site. Make sure you still need the modules that you have, the content that you have. Maybe you want to prune old content older than 5 years ago. Maybe you want to get rid of a bunch of spam users, this kind of thing. It's really helpful to kind of take a holistic look at everything that's in your database and figure out what you need and what you don't. There's a DevOps component. You know, Drupal 7 still ran on PHP 4, which hasn't been supported by the PHP community in eons. So a lot of times you're looking at your hosting, you know, either improving or changing in order to support Drupal 9, because Drupal 9, in order to keep everyone, you know, well supported into the future, does require higher system requirements than Drupal 7 did. There's a data import piece. So I'll talk about the migration API in a second here, but essentially you create some YAML and PHP plugins that migrate the data from the source to the destination. And you need to do that for any of the content in your site, especially if it's provided by a custom module. Then finally, you have your sort of like your business logic and presentation. So the theme layer in Drupal 8 and 9 was rewritten to be something called Twig, which is a fantastic improvement. It allows you to, for example, assume automatic escaping of things like XSS vulnerabilities. The syntax is very nice for people who are familiar with markup, but not PHP. But as a result of that, there needs to be a whole retooling of your front end done. And similarly with any business logic custom code that you have, you know, Drupal has this amazing community, but unfortunately they are not going to port your code for you. You need to do that yourself. So this can be a significant kind of thing. Let's talk about what the steps are. I think the biggest piece of advice I can give you here is really audit the modules and custom code that you're running and ask yourself, do you need it? And especially, do you need it now that in Drupal 9 core is so much more fully featured than it was back in the day? You want to get on the latest version of all your Drupal 7 projects. A lot of times, you know, if you're on a version from 2 or 3 years ago. There's been bug fixes since then that will make the migration smoother. You want to check the known upgrade issues page, and I'll be sharing these slides after. This is a page on Drupal.org with new, known issues between the 7 and 8 or 9 migration path. For example, something you might not expect is your views will not be migrated. There's no automatic code, sort of situation for views. So you're going to have to more or less reconfigure those by hand on the new site. And then unlike Drupal 8 to 9, where you kind of do the update on the main site, run update.php, and you're done. And that's kind of how even major versions used to operate from 5 to 6. And then you'd have like that harrowing, few moments of like, oh God, is the update script going to screw up my production site? Like, it's very tense and stressful. In Drupal 9 or 8 and 9 and above, you now do this by building out your new Drupal 9 site in a separate environment, migrating the content and stuff into it, and then making a switch over at the last second when you're ready to go. So that's much better from the standpoint that your production site can stay up and running the whole time. You don't experience downtime while you're doing your migration, but it does mean you need kind of that separate environment in order to do it. So you're going to install a fresh copy of Drupal 9 on that environment. And this is really important. You don't want to make content changes there because what you're going to want to do is do incremental migrations of pulling over all the new latest content from your Drupal 7 site periodically as you complete your migration. And every time you do that, it's going to overwrite the stuff that's in the Drupal 9 site. So treat your Drupal 7 site as the site of record. Drupal 9 is more or less some glass that's kind of seeing into it and pulling over the stuff that you want to see. So you'll migrate your Drupal 7 site into it, and then you're going to port your custom code and theme. And those things are often done in tandem with one another. And for porting your custom code and theme, we'll talk about a few different tools that can help with this entire process. So the Migrate API is a really powerful API, and it can pull from a lot of different sources. So in core, by default, it's pulling from either Drupal 6 or 7. But if you look in contrib, there's all kinds of ones to pull from CSV files or SQL or WordPress or JSON or XML and various other types of things. So it formats all those source things into a common language called a source plugin. And then you're trying to map those over to a destination. And the destination will be some kind of a Drupal 9 concept like config or nodes or terms, that kind of thing. And then in between, you have what are called process plugins. And what process plugins will do, I have a little Autobot logo there because they basically transform the data to, for example, remove white space or things like that. So that's kind of how the API works in a nutshell. There's a lot of really great documentation on Drupal.org about this. And then when you go to execute migrations, you kind of have two paths. If it's a very, very simple site, the core Drupal Migrate UI might work. This kind of gives you a list of all the modules and whether they were successful in upgrading or not. And then you kind of like dig around and figure out what the problems were and kind of go from there. What most people do in practice is use Drush for this. So there's a series of modules, Migrate Tools, Migrate Upgrade, and Migrate Plus, that give you a bunch of really helpful commands to use in Drush, the command line tool for Drupal, to move all that content over. Roll it back if you're experiencing problems, stop and reset, different things, view what kind of messages are coming from the system, that kind of stuff. You also have to make sure there's a destination to migrate to, right? So for your contrib and core modules, this is largely taken care of for you, at least if they have, have developed a migration path. But for your custom code, that will be kind of a different story. So the first thing I would recommend doing is installing upgrade status. And this is the same module that Matt talked about in the Drupal 8 section, just the Drupal 7 version. If you install that on your Drupal 7 site, that gives you, once again, that kind of dashboard overview that says, here's how ready or not your site is, and here's different modules that, in different states of development, that kind of thing. And then for your custom code, we developed over an Acquia hackathon one week, this Drupal 7 to 8.9 module upgrader. So it is not perfect, but it does take a lot of the really tedious changes out. So for example, it'll move info files to info YAML files. It'll extract hook block into some block plugins, that kind of thing. So it can get you, say 40 to 50% of the way there with the skeleton of your module, and then you can kind of go from there. It also has a mode which just runs analyze on the code and will point you off to different change records. So if you're not familiar with the API changes between 7 and 9, it can help you kind of get up to speed on that. And then I like to plug this project. This is a cool little thing called Migrate QA, which was developed by the Phase 2 folks. And what it is it's essentially kind of like a meta layer on top of your Drupal 9 migration, where it's like, how we all use spreadsheets all the time. This is basically using the spreadsheet inside of Drupal. So you can do things like, mark it for review by someone and assign it to people. You can flag it as like, oh, this has a broken image, that kind of thing. So it's a way to kind of do a content audit on the way in when it's coming to Drupal 9. So you might be asking, like, gosh, that sounds like a lot of work. Is there an easier way? And this gets to the sponsored part of this session. So I will talk briefly, ever so briefly, about a tool that we've had in development called Acquia Migrate Accelerate. So this just launched in limited availability release last week, the week before, recently ago. So, hi, buddy. My cat would like to be part of this presentation. Anyway, so this is a product we built to help accelerate the migrations. It is unfortunately not a one-button click and poof magic ponies or farting rainbows everywhere. But what it does do is it provides a workspace for you to do your migration. It sets Drupal 9 up for you automatically with the modules that you need. And it gives you a UI instead of command line tools in order to run the migrations. So it's really helpful for the situation where a lot of times, what happens in a Drupal 7 and 9 migrations, you kind of have to find the most senior developer at your organization to work on this stuff. This allows, more like a site builder or a junior developer persona to make some progress on it. And what we're aiming for here is to reduce that time and cost of Drupal 7 and 9 migrations quite significantly. Is very dependent on the site that you have, how many modules you have, how complex your data model is, how much custom code you have, and so on. But we are aiming to help because we really want to see, all of these folks make the hurdle over to the Drupal 9 happiness way of life. So what the tool will do is it'll give you a new, it's part of Acquia Cloud. It will give you a new environment. This environment has a couple of special things about it. For example, the refresh button will allow you to automatically downsync data from your production environment, so you're always migrating against the latest stuff. And we purposely don't let you copy and click and drag and drop code and files here because you don't want to accidentally take a Drupal 7 database and throw it at Drupal 9 code or vice versa, because it'll really mess things up. So the name of the game with Migrate Accelerate is let's get rid of a lot of the really awful ways that people can shoot themselves in the foot. So this is a part of it that I'm really excited about, which is the module recommendations engine. So if you've ever done one of these 7.9 or 7 to 8 or any kind of migration from Drupal, you have to make this horrible spreadsheet of doom where it's like, here's all the modules that I'm using and here's the Drupal 9 equivalents, but this one doesn't have a Drupal 9 equivalent, so I have to go and look up what the best option is and what the migration path is, and oh, there's this bug and I need this patch. We've already done that homework already on hundreds of modules, especially the most frequently used modules. And so we have basically a library that checks your Drupal 7 site against our record of what the best modules are to use and what patches are needed. And then we'll automatically set up your Drupal 9 code base with those modules and patches in place, so you don't have to do all the research. And then the UI for the product is pretty simple. It'll show you all of your data on your Drupal 7 site, kind of in site builder terminology. So you don't have to know D7 _ entity node, blah, blah. It will just show you what the human readable version of those things are. And then we have this dashboard. And the dashboard will let you kind of see which things you want to move. You can migrate them independently. You can migrate them all in a chunk. It really depends on how you want to do it. You can preview your data before it is migrated, so you don't have to import everything, then check for errors, then roll it all back and come back. You can see both the raw source and destination values as well as a rendered preview. So you can check for things like broken images or things like that. And if you want, you can actually look up one particular thing by URL if you're interested in, say, the latest press release that just went out last week, as opposed to the other 30,000 of them. And then the actual UI is written in React using all of the new Drupal 9 headless support. So you just check off what you want to import. You click import, this little progress bar, swooshy whooshies, and shows you all the things that are progressing. And the last thing is, if you have problems, we try to recommend solutions. So there's a bunch of errors that you're going to get if you do a migration. That's just part of the game. What we'll do is give you some, kind of Drupal human readable advice on what to do about those problems. Kind of save you some Googling and some Stack Overflowing during the migration. Oh, and then finally, if you are a Drupal nerd who knows a lot about the underlying structures of the Migrate system, and you don't want that kind of quote unquote dumbed down for you, we also provide insight into what these different things are. So what we call shared structure for content items, what those end up being under the hood as Migrate plugins, which is useful if you want to get in there and debug anything. All right, that's the product pitch. Sorry about that. Now Matt's going to talk about a case study of how we went about bringing Acquia.com over to Drupal 9.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Angie. All right, so just to kind of bring people up to speed on what we did with Acquia.com and just talking about where we started. So we had a legacy code base that was built on originally early D8 versions, and we kind of went through all the work to get it up to speed. So we brought it all the way up to 8.8, made sure everything was kind of upgraded appropriately. Part of why we started this, we just had a site that had very disparate designs and UX throughout the entire site. So everywhere you kind of look, things were kind of like slightly differently set up, and it was hard to kind of navigate. There was also a lot of technical debt that was consistently making that site hard to update and maintain. So it was really a point in time to really make it better. Next slide. And what we did, so we started on a new Drupal 9 code base from the ground up. We reevaluated and re-architected our entire content model. So it was very heavy, originally paragraphs based. We kind of restructured it down into more regular field-based model. We migrated legacy structured content from 8 to 9. So things that were in paragraphs land and had more flexibility, we kind of migrated out of that using a lot of the migrate tooling. We did implement a component-based design system and theme using Site Studio. That was implemented. And then we upgraded a number of custom models that we had to support D9 using a lot of the tools to make it easier. And just some things to like what to watch out for, things that we ran into. The first one being just any legacy code. As with any site that's been around for a while, legacy code lurks in many dark corners of your site, so be sure to kind of look through it and find it. Content migration, even if migrating, you can migrate legacy content from 8 to 9. So if you're doing dramatic changes to your content model or how your content's structured, there is some additional work that you can do to kind of make that migration over. And working with any new tools and methods. So we added Site Studio on top of this, another Acquia product. And then just overall working in D9 was pretty much the same, but just making sure you make note of any of that stuff. And then coordinating design and development as with any Drupal project, keep an eye on scope creep, making sure that you know what you're delivering and how much you're delivering when.
Yeah, I think what's cool about this is it shows, you have a lot of different options on how to perform this migration. So if you want to do just the quick, I built my Drupal 8 site a couple of years ago. I know it's solid. Let's just run the tools and get up to speed. That's an option for you. If you're like, as long as I'm doing an upgrade anyway, why don't I take the opportunity to kind of look at, what are the flaws in my current site? How do I want it to work in an ideal situation? Like as Matt was saying, they really use this, even though they could have just done a quick, 1, 2, 3 done between 8 and 9. They took the opportunity to kind of, evaluate, we really want more consistency in the branding. We want to make sure we move to a component-based design. It's a good opportunity to clean up some technical debt that might have, accumulated on the site and put it under the guise of something that has business value to your stakeholders, which is improved security support. So, yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yep.
If you want to learn more on any of these topics, come to the Acquia booth. Matt is in there later on today, going into more detail about the rebuild of Acquia.com and Site Studio and how all that's empowering the marketing team. We also have an Ask Us Anything by Mike Madison on Drupal 8 to 9 updates, if that's your situation. And if your situation is 7 to 9, I'll be going more in depth on the Acquia Migrate Accelerate tool from 3 to 3:30, and also happy to answer whatever other questions you might have. So. Yeah, thanks. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and then we'll transition to Q&A. Oh, and don't forget to tell us how we did on the survey for the session. All right. Let's see. I see some things in the Q&A tab. Haha, this is a great question. Angie, when do we move Drupal.org to Drupal 9? Fascinating question. So Drupal.org is still on Drupal 7 these days, not even Drupal 8. And I don't have a good answer for you. What I can tell you is some of the challenges behind why Drupal.org is still on Drupal 7. And that is because although there's a lot of aspects of Drupal.org that are kind of just, standard Drupal-y things that Drupal's good at. For example, there's a huge knowledge base. Drupal's excellent at that. There's things that, blogs, community groups, all these kinds of things. That's all pretty easy to migrate. There's kind of built-in tooling for doing all of that. But Drupal.org is also the home of our developer community. And because back in, 2003 or something, we decided, Drupal is so powerful that I bet we could run our own version control system on Drupal.org. That was a decision that was made back then, which is pretty great. It's neat that your product is that flexible that it can do everything, even be GitHub. But unfortunately, because we built our own GitHub on Drupal.org, it makes Drupal.org very, very complex to move over because if you're doing your site right, it should more or less be like, say, 80% contributed projects, 20% custom code. That's a very rough guideline. Drupal.org is not like that. There is a lot of custom code required to do that, as well as some stylistic changes and things like that. So the reason why Drupal.org is a difficult one to get moved to every major version is because of all that kind of custom code stuff. So I know the Drupal Association is working on plans to migrate more and more of that project module stuff to GitLab, which is kind of an open source version of GitHub that we've started using within the past couple of years. And as more and more of that happens, it will be much, much easier to move Drupal.org to Drupal 9 because we'll be talking about just moving the Drupal stuff, not the coding stuff. So in short, I don't know. I imagine that Tim Lennon and folks are having a Drupal.org panel. They usually do at these DrupalCons. So I would recommend showing up to that and asking that question. Do you need to be using Acquia in order to use Acquia Migrate Accelerate? Sadly, yes, at this time you do. We do have future plans to open source that UI, the whiz-bangy thing. But because you have to have an environment to use Drupal 9 itself, it was seen as a lot better user experience to build the hosting component into the product. So at this point, it is available to anyone on Acquia Cloud Enterprise. And we're working in the future about expanding that out. Let's see, what were some complicated Drupal 7 and 9 issues that you had to debug, and what is the process like? So you're just gonna get a bunch of errors. I don't know, Matt, was this your experience as well when you tried to move from 8 to 9? Were you getting a bunch of migration errors, or was that pretty straightforward?
I mean, I know migration was probably definitely one of the harder parts that we tackled. But yeah, it was more just like having to run it like consistently was our biggest thing. Especially if now you're implementing content freezes and things like that to make sure people don't keep like adding content to the site.
Yes, that is a whole thing. Yeah, deciding when is the right time to pull the trigger on the migration, and then after that, don't make more changes to your site, or you're going to seem to be on a hamster wheel of sadness. Yes, that's a good point. So, but in general, the common issues page covers a lot of this, and it'll be things like, say your filter formats won't quite line up right. There was a filtered HTML in Drupal 7. There's a basic HTML in Drupal 9. Sometimes that can cause problems. So it's mainly things that, especially if your site is older and was kind of architected on older technology, you might struggle with. I believe we are out of time. Is that correct, Michael?
That was correct. If you have a few minutes built in, but yeah, we were wrapping up at 11:55. So if you want to answer one more question, I think we have time, or we can wrap it up.
Can we see the cat? All right, how about we'll answer this last question. Can you see the cat? Yeah, one second. Okay. She does not like that, but there she is. Okay. That was not a good time. Wow, she was stressed. So we saw the cat. I'm just looking really quick. Pantheon does not, to my knowledge, have an equivalent to Acquia Migrate Accelerate. And then what Pantheon advocates is the use of Feeds UI, or Feeds Migrate UI, which is a module that's in development that kind of uses the Feeds module on top of Migrate module. Some of the critical contributed modules are not supported by Drupal 9 still. That is true. If we go, actually, can I? Deprecated status. Sorry, this will be the last question because this is actually a really good question that lots of folks are going to want to know. So if we take a look at deprecation status, hopefully that's what you see. Is that what you see?
Yep.
Cool. So this will show you a list of the modules that Drupal has and whether or not they're compatible yet with Drupal 9. So as you can see, if you go by usage, all of the top, say 50, I think I need to go like 3 or 4 pages into this to find one that is not Drupal 9 compatible, which is good. So most of them are explicitly Drupal 9 compatible. Anything in this yellow zone, which is its only info files or composer JSON problem file, what that means is that there's a one-line change required in any Drupal 8 module to make it Drupal 9 compatible. And that's to change its info file to say, hey, I support anything greater than Drupal 8 point whatever, and also Drupal 9. And if that one-line change hasn't been made, the module might work fine for Drupal 9, but it won't register as such in the tool. And there was an effort done about 6 months ago or so to go and automatically file patches against all of those modules that fall into this bucket. And so if you see a module is not compatible, check its issue queue, because a lot of times there are patches there to either fix this one issue or issues that are covered by that Rector tool that we talked about. Rector being the tool that automatically translates your PHP code from one version to the other. So there you go. That's about 3/4 of the pie that's already Drupal 9 compatible. If you are and fall into this unlucky bucket of this 1/4, then I would still check the issue queue, because some enterprising contributor might have come along and already ported the module and just the maintainer hasn't gotten around to it yet. You can also choose to take over maintainership of a module if you want. There's a process called the abandoned projects process, where essentially if you reach out to a maintainer and they don't respond within, I think it's 2 or 3 weeks, then you're able to make yourself the maintainer, and then you can commit whatever changes that you need to do to the module. So that would be kind of the worst case scenario. You'd be looking at that. Some other module developers might offer sponsorship opportunities. If it's a very complex module with a lot of moving pieces, it might be really hard to port. So there's a lot of different options, but I would first just check the issue queue, because 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a patch that does what you need. You incorporate that into your composer JSON and you're good to go. Okay, now we're definitely over time, but thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And yeah, if you have other questions, you can find both Matt and I at the Acquia booth later on today. So thank you so much.